Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Pines. When the highway is cloaked in darkness, the quiet hum of a car can quickly shift from soothing to sinister. Today's stories explore allegedly true haunting moments that unfolded on lonely night drives. So buckle up and prepare to confront the secrets lurking just beyond the headlights. The Damsel in Distress. My dad used to tell this story all the time when I was a kid, and even though he told it more times than I could count, every time he got to the end, his eyes would narrow, and he'd give that little half smile, like he knew something we didn't. When he was 18 or 19, he was working all day on a job site. Just a normal day. It was late when he started his drive to visit his parents, about an hour and a half out in the country. It was dark, one of those stretches where there's nothing but fields and woods for miles. No streetlights, no houses, just endless, empty road. He was on a quiet, desolate stretch when he saw it. A car pulled over on the side of the road, the back tire flat. He slowed down, glancing at the car as he passed. A woman was standing next to it, waving her arms, trying to get someone's attention. Even from a distance, my dad could see the pleading in her eyes. She was young, probably around his age, and she was striking. Blonde, green eyes, dressed in a white blouse that seemed too bright against the dark night. Now my dad, being the kind of guy he was, wasn't exactly one to offer help to a stranger, but this was a young woman stranded in the middle of nowhere, late at night. Basic common decency dictated that he should help. Or maybe he was just horny. Either way, he pulled up a little further ahead and parked his car. Then he stepped out, walking back towards her. "Need any help?" he asked. Her voice was soft, and she thanked him quickly. "I don't know how to change a tire," she admitted. Dad, who'd been taught how to do just about everything by his own father, smiled and gestured to the trunk. "Pop it open. I'll get it fixed for you." They made small talk while he worked. She said she was on her way home from work and that she was a nurse at a local hospital. Once the tire was swapped, she thanked him again, a little more insistently this time, like she felt she owed him something more. Dad didn't think much of it. He gave her a wave and started walking back to his car. "Hold on," she called out, her voice catching his attention. She reached into her car, pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, and quickly scribbled something down. She handed him the paper, squeezing his hand as she did. "My hero," she said with a smile. Dad got back in his car, glancing down at the paper. There, in careful handwriting, was a name, Delilah, followed by a phone number. My dad grinned to himself. This was the best luck he'd had in months. He started his car and waited for Delilah to get going, making sure she was safely back on the road before he pulled off. He drove behind her for about 2 miles before she made a turn. As he passed, Dad gave a little wave and whispered, "Night-night, Delilah," under his breath. It was a quiet night, just my dad, the road, and the sound of the tires on the asphalt. He fiddled with the radio, trying to get some music, but all he could catch was static. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see nothing but the darkness of the empty road behind him. But there was movement. A flash, like something shifting in the backseat of his car. His heart skipped. He glanced up at the road, then back at the mirror. There was nothing there. He exhaled, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But as the silence stretched on, his mind wandered back to Delilah, to the way her hand had squeezed his when she gave him the note. He was smiling now, thinking about her again, when suddenly a second flash caught his eye, this time more obvious. Just as he turned his head to see what it was, he felt it, a sharp pain across his shoulder. A hand reached over his seat and grabbed his neck, choking him. A man had been hiding in the back seat. The knife came next, slashing across his arm as my dad tried to fight back, desperate to get free. Panic surged through him. His heart raced, but his mind stayed sharp. He couldn't win a fight like this. The only thing he could do was drive. The only weapon he had was the car. With one hand on the wheel, he slammed his foot down on the gas pedal, jerking the car hard to the left. He shot off the road, rumbling over a small ditch, then slamming into a tree. Dad's seatbelt snapped him back into his seat, but the guy in the back, he wasn't so lucky. The man was thrown forward, slamming headfirst into the dashboard before collapsing, bloodied and half-conscious, on the floor. Dad's pulse pounded in his ears, but he stumbled out of the car, adrenaline still pumping. The knife glinted on the ground. He picked it up, trembling, but still somehow calm. The man groaned. When he tried to pull himself out the passenger side door, Dad didn't hesitate. He walked around the other side of the car and punched the man in the face. Once, twice, maybe more. Whenever we asked him how many times he actually hit the guy, Dad always smiled and said, "A couple." The car wouldn't start, so Dad just started walking, figuring he was better off getting away from the wreck and away from the man. As he walked, he considered what had just happened. He figured it had to be a setup. The guy snuck into his car while Delilah distracted him. She'd done her job very well. After nearly an hour of walking, headlights came into view. To Dad's relief, it was a cop car. After giving the officer his statement, Dad accompanied the police back to the scene. They couldn't find the man anywhere. Just Dad's car, some blood on the dashboard, and some muddy footprints. They had the car towed and even gave my dad a ride to my grandparents' house. Country living. 2 days later, my grandma handed Dad a piece of paper. "I was doing laundry and found this in your pocket," she said. "Who's Delilah?" To this day, Dad won't say if he ever called that number. Figures in the fog. Several years back, I took a new job about an hour and a half away. The money was good, but the commute was taking a toll on me and my marriage, as it left my wife caring for our baby almost entirely on her own. I probably wouldn't have lasted much longer anyway, but the story I am about to share certainly quickened my exit. One Thursday evening, a pileup on the freeway led to me taking some back roads home, adding a good 45 more minutes to the drive. The fog rolled in thick as I drove along the lonely stretch of road, a shroud of gray that swallowed the world beyond my windshield. My headlights struggled to cut through it, offering little comfort. I was exhausted, and something about the heavy air made me uneasy. As I navigated the winding road, I caught sight of something on the shoulder. I slowed down as I approached and realized as I drew close that it was a pile of clothes. I shrugged and kept driving. Up a little ways, I came across another article of clothing, and then another. A faded jacket, a single shoe, all spread out across this back-country road. A slight shiver crawled up my spine. What was going on here? I slowed down, glancing around, half expecting to see someone looking for it, but the road was empty, just me and the fog. I pressed on, the uneasy feeling growing. Moments later, I came across the culprit, a suitcase laying open in the middle of the road. My anxiety eased. The suitcase likely fell out of the back of a truck and busted open. Mystery solved. But no sooner had my unease subsided than I was forced to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting something much larger than some discarded laundry in the middle of the road. A broken-down van, its hood propped open as if the owner had just stepped away for a moment, sat diagonal across the center line. Summit Falls PHS was written on the side of the van. The license plate hung precariously, half dangling. It felt wrong, abandoned and forgotten in this desolate place. But surely it couldn't have been there too long, as it blocked any traffic that would have come through. I scanned the area, searching for any sign of life, but all I found was silence. A little freaked out, I kept on, driving onto the shoulder to get around the abandoned vehicle. As I drove, the fog thickened even further, swirling around my car like tendrils reaching out for me. I was crawling along with the high beams on, barely able to see. I turned the radio off so I could focus, plunging back into the eerie quiet. That's when I first noticed them. Silhouettes moving along the side of the road. I rubbed my eyes, half convinced they were tricks of the fog, but they didn't disappear. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, drifted along the edge of the road. My heart raced. I couldn't make out their features, but something about them felt all wrong. I couldn't imagine why anyone would be out in the middle of nowhere this late at night. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my instincts screaming at me to flee. I noticed something glimmering in the fog. It was a bracelet, gold and delicate, lying in the middle of the road. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. Who had dropped it? Were these figures just out here looking for it? Was that their car back there? Their clothes? For some reason, I didn't think so, and forced myself to keep driving. But the fog wrapped around my car like a suffocating blanket, distorting any sense of direction. I could only inch along to remain sure I wasn't drifting off the road entirely. The figures seemed to close in from both sides, or maybe I was imagining it. No, I was sure they were getting closer. Suddenly, the headlights caught something, a figure standing directly in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my car lurching to a halt. My heart raced as I gripped the wheel, honestly considering just mowing down whoever or whatever was in front of me. The figure's features were obscured by the thick haze. Slowly it moved forward, my headlights illuminating more and more of it. It was dressed in what looked like a hospital gown, tattered and stained. I was frozen in place, fear rooting me to my seat. But then, in that moment of paralysis, the figure lifted its arm, pointing towards something behind me. There was a bang on the back of my car. I turned to see another figure, another person, in a similar dingy hospital gown. And another. And another. They were emerging from the darkness on both sides of me. Instinct kicked in. I twisted the wheel and accelerated, my tires biting into the asphalt as I careened past the figure in front of me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I drove faster, the fog swirling in my wake. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment I saw a handful of figures. 5, 6, maybe more, before they were all swallowed whole by the darkness. I didn't stop until the fog began to lift, revealing a distant glow of lights ahead, signs of life, of safety. As I drove into the town, I took a deep breath, grateful to be free. But deep down, a sense of dread lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that the fog had held secrets, that it had swallowed stories of people who never made it out. I shuddered at the thought, knowing that I had narrowly escaped becoming one of them. The traffic stop. It was a crisp autumn night, a little after 11:30, as I drove home from an old friend's new house. I had planned to leave much earlier, but pizza and reminiscing had won out. Now I'd be lucky to make it home by 1 a.m. The county road stretched out before me, framed by endless fields and the eerie stillness of farmland. As the moon cast ghostly shadows across the asphalt, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, lulled by the hum of my car and the comforting serenity of the road. But that tranquility shattered when I saw the flashing lights behind me. "Oh, great," I muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong, but the unease started to creep in as the patrol car pulled up behind me. The lights danced in the rearview mirror, illuminating the inside of my car in a garish, flickering glow. The officer stepped out, approaching slowly. There was something a little off about him. His movements were deliberate, almost exaggerated. As he reached my window, I rolled it down. "License, registration, and insurance," he said, his voice low and steady. I complied, handing over the documents, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His uniform seemed outdated, the fabric not quite right, like something from an old movie. The car he drove also looked peculiar, old school, a relic from the 80s, complete with a boxy shape and retro lights. He took my information back to his car, but instead of getting inside or running my plates, he just stood there, staring at the papers in his hand. I watched him through the rearview mirror, my heart beginning to race. It felt like he was just pretending to review them, lost in a world of his own. Then something else caught my eye. His shoes. As the headlights of his car illuminated him, I realized he was wearing brown work boots instead of the polished black shoes you always expect from law enforcement. That's when the dread started to sink in. "This car was reported stolen," he said, approaching me again, his expression cold and unyielding. I blinked in disbelief. This is my car. You can see that the registration and license match, I replied, my stomach churning. He leaned closer, his eyes piercing into mine. A forced smile spread across his lips. It's probably just a mix-up. I'm sure we'll get it sorted out. But I'm gonna need you to get out of the car. Panic flooded my senses. This guy wasn't a real cop. I was sure of it. But I had to play it cool. Of course, officer, I said, forcing a calmness I didn't feel. I reached for my key in the ignition, my pulse pounding in my ears. For just a split second, his gaze drifted down the road. It was all the opening I needed. I hurled the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. His hand shot out, trying to grab me, but I was already moving. He stumbled, falling to the ground as I sped away, glancing back just in time to see him scramble to his feet and dash to his car. My heart raced as I dialed 911, telling the operator about the situation while keeping my eyes on the road. They directed me to the nearest police station, and I frantically typed the address into Google Maps. Just as the directions loaded, I felt a violent jolt from behind. The fake cop had turned off his lights and sirens, so I didn't notice him gaining ground until he rammed my car from behind. Adrenaline surged as I sped back up, the voice on the phone fading into a blur. The tension mounted as I approached the outskirts of a small town, and I could see his headlights drawing closer again, his driving growing erratic and desperate. Red lights and stop signs became mere suggestions as I flew down the road, determined to reach safety. I could feel the fear gnawing at me, but I forced myself to stay focused. Finally, I spotted the police station and swerved into the parking lot, ignoring the spaces and barreling right up to the front door. For a moment, the fake cop seemed confused, slowing down as he processed where we were. Then, as if realizing his mistake, he swerved wildly, plowing through the sidewalk and back onto the road, speeding off into the night. Within moments, 2 real cops rushed out of the station, and I stumbled out of my car, breathless. They quickly took off in pursuit of the imposter, but he was already long gone. I escaped that night, just barely. I shuddered to think what he had planned if he had gotten me out of my car. As I sat in the police station, they reassured me that I was safe now. Yet my mind lingered on one chilling fact. The fake officer still had my license and registration. That meant he had my address and knew where to find me. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the notion that I was never truly safe again. The dark road had swallowed something more than my peace of mind. It had stolen my sense of security. And that thought haunted me long after the night was over. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed these night drive horror stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time with more Whispers from the Pines.